When I saw my place card at my son's wedding, my blood ran cold. Rebecca Hayes, single mother, charity case, was written in gold script for everyone to see. I picked up that humiliating card, stepped outside, and made one phone call that would destroy their entire world. Hold up, I'm curious where you're listening from, and if this story spoke to you, make sure you're subscribed. Trust me, what I have planned for tomorrow is going to blow you away. By Monday morning, the Thornfield family would discover that the charity case they'd been mocking owned everything they held dear. My story begins 8 months before that devastating Saturday evening in September, when my son Daniel brought home the woman who would become his wife. Cassandra Thornfield was stunning, the kind of blonde, blue-eyed beauty that graced magazine covers with a trust fund to match her perfect cheekbones. When Daniel first introduced us at my modest apartment in Riverside Heights, I watched Cassandra's crystal blue eyes sweep across my living room like she was surveying a crime scene. The secondhand furniture, the family photos and drugstore frames, the small kitchen where I'd cooked countless meals for my son after his father abandoned us when Daniel was just 3 years old. "How quaint," she said, her voice dripping with the kind of false sweetness that only comes from generations of old money privilege. It's so inspiring to see someone making the best of their circumstances. Even then, as I served them coffee in my mismatched mugs, I bit my tongue. My boy was happy, and at 28, he deserved love. If only he could see past her polished exterior to the coldness that lurked beneath those perfectly applied layers of makeup. What Daniel didn't know, what none of them knew, was that his humble single mother had been hiding a secret for 7 years. Ever since the day I'd sold my struggling tech startup to Meridian Industries for what the newspapers called an undisclosed sum. That undisclosed sum was $2.3 billion. Let me tell you about Rebecca Hayes, the woman the Thornfield family thought they knew. On the surface, I was exactly what I appeared to be, a 52-year-old single mother who worked as a freelance graphic designer from her small apartment, drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic, and shopped at discount stores. I'd raised Daniel alone after his father walked out, working multiple jobs to put food on the table and keep the lights on. What they didn't know was that during those lean years, while Daniel slept, I'd been coding. Every night, after tucking him into bed, I'd work on a revolutionary software platform that would eventually transform how hospitals manage patient data. CloudMed started in my living room with nothing but a laptop and a dream. When Meridian Industries acquired CloudMed, everyone assumed I'd fade into comfortable retirement. What would a single mother from Riverside Heights know about managing billions? That assumption suited me perfectly. Rebecca Hayes, the struggling single mom, lived quietly in her apartment. But RH Ventures, my investment firm hidden behind layers of shell companies and legal trusts, controlled stakes in 17 major corporations across 3 countries. The Thornfield family's precious country club, I owned 43% of it. Their exclusive private school where Cassandra served on the board was funded by grants from the Hayes Foundation. My foundation, though I'd kept my involvement completely anonymous. Most deliciously ironic of all, Thornfield Industries, the textile empire that had funded the family's lavish lifestyle for 4 generations, owed their survival to a massive loan from Pinnacle Capital, a subsidiary of RH Ventures. The charity case literally owned the roof over their heads. For 8 months, I endured their subtle and not-so-subtle cruelty. The engagement party at the Thornfield estate was my first real taste of their world. Marble fountains, crystal chandeliers that cost more than most people's homes, and guest lists filled with society names I recognized from Forbes magazines. Evelyn Thornfield, Cassandra's mother, introduced me to her circle of friends with barely concealed disdain. "This is Rebecca, Daniel's mother. She's a graphic..." The conversations would die the moment I approached their little clusters. They'd smile those practice society smiles and ask pointed questions about my little business and whether I was managing financially with wedding expenses approaching. When I offered to contribute to the rehearsal dinner, Evelyn actually laughed out loud. "Oh, Rebecca, how sweet of you to offer. But these affairs can be quite expensive. We wouldn't want you to strain yourself." Strain myself. If only she knew that the catering company handling their rehearsal dinner was owned by Hospitality Unlimited, another company in my portfolio. The bridal shower was particularly cruel. Held at the exclusive Willowbrook Spa, it was a showcase of wealth that would make even seasoned billionaires blink. When gift opening time came, I watched Cassandra unwrap Hermes scarves, Cartier jewelry, and designer handbags that cost more than most people's annual salaries. My gift, a beautiful crystal vase I'd chosen carefully from Bloomingdale's, was held up like evidence of my inadequacy. "How practical," Cassandra announced to the tittering crowd. "Every couple needs something affordable for everyday use." The laughter that followed wasn't kind. It was the sound of privilege looking down on perceived poverty, of people who'd never worked for anything mocking someone they thought had nothing.
As the wedding day approached, the exclusion became more systematic. Every decision was made without consulting me. Venue selection, menu planning, flower arrangements. I learned about them through Daniel, who grew increasingly uncomfortable with his new family's treatment of his mother. "Mom, maybe you should say something," he'd suggested after another event where I'd been treated like an afterthought. "Tell them about your success, about CloudMed." But I'd kept my secret for 7 years for good reasons. I wanted to know what kind of people my son was marrying into when they thought I had no power, no influence, no ability to affect their lives. Their true character was on full display, and it was uglier than I'd imagined. The final insult came 3 days before the wedding when Cassandra called to discuss seating arrangements. "Rebecca, we've put you at table 23 with some of Daniel's college friends and their partners. You'll be more comfortable there than with the family tables. We know how overwhelming our social circle can be for someone from your background." Table 23. The singles table. The kids' table. The place where uncomfortable relatives get hidden so they don't embarrass the important people. As I hung up the phone, I made a decision that would change everything. It was time for the Thornfield family to learn that charity works both ways, and sometimes it comes from the most unexpected sources. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, a navy blue dress from Nordstrom that was elegant but not ostentatious. Nothing that would draw unwanted attention or give them ammunition for their whispered criticisms. Evelyn introduced me to her circle of friends with the enthusiasm typically reserved for discussing root canal procedures. "Ladies, I'd like you to meet Rebecca Hayes, Daniel's mother. She's been raising him as a single parent in Riverside Heights. Such dedication to making ends meet." The way she emphasized making ends meet turned my motherhood into a poverty story, my sacrifices into evidence of failure. Her friends, all perfectly coiffed women and designer everything, regarded me with the kind of sympathetic pity usually reserved for stray animals. "How difficult that must have been," one of them cooed. "And now you must be so relieved that Daniel found someone who can provide stability." Provide stability, as if my son were a charity project who'd been rescued by the benevolent Thornfield family. The worst moment came during the gift presentation. Cassandra opened box after box of expensive jewelry, crystal, and art pieces, while guests oohed and awed appropriately. My gift, a beautiful set of hand-blown wine glasses I'd found at a local artisan shop, was held up briefly, acknowledged with a tight smile, and quickly set aside. "How thoughtful," Cassandra said, in a voice that meant exactly the opposite. "We'll treasure these." But I could see in her eyes that my gift would probably end up in a garage sale or donated to charity, the irony of which wasn't lost on me. While enduring these social humiliations, I did what any successful businesswoman would do. I gathered intelligence. Through my network of corporate attorneys and financial advisors, I began quietly investigating the Thornfield family's actual financial situation. What I discovered was fascinating. The Thornfield textile empire, while impressive on paper,
was heavily leveraged and increasingly dependent on foreign manufacturing contracts that were becoming less profitable each year. Harrison's investment in the country club was actually a desperate attempt to maintain social status while the family business struggled to adapt to changing markets. Most interesting of all, Thornfield Industries had recently secured a massive loan from Pinnacle Capital to modernize their facilities and expand into sustainable textiles. Pinnacle Capital was, of course, one of my subsidiary companies, though the Thornfields had no idea they were now financially beholden to the charity case they loved to mock. The beautiful irony wasn't lost on me. While they were discussing my financial limitations over champagne and caviar, they were literally living off money that came from my investment portfolio. The bridal shower at Willowbrook Spa was my last attempt to give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe, I thought, in a more intimate setting, away from the pressure to perform for their social circle, I might see some genuine warmth from these people. I was wrong. The gifts were a showcase of privilege that bordered on obscene. Hermes scarves worth thousands, Cartier jewelry that could fund a small business, designer handbags that cost more than most people's annual vacations. When my turn came, I presented a crystal vase I'd found at Bloomingdale's, beautiful, tasteful, and admittedly modest compared to the extravagance surrounding it. Cassandra held it up with the same expression she might use for a dirty tissue. "How practical," she announced to the room full of giggling socialites. "Every couple needs something affordable for their everyday flowers." The laughter that followed was sharp and cruel, the sound of people who'd never wanted for anything, mocking someone they believed had nothing. But what stung most was seeing a few other mothers in the room, women whose sons had married into this family, nodding along with the cruelty rather than standing up against it. As I sat in that spa, surrounded by the sound of privileged women laughing at my expense, I made a decision that would change everything. It was time for the Thornfield family to learn that charity works both ways, and sometimes the most generous donors are the ones you least expect. For 8 months, the Thornfield family treated me like their personal charity project, mocking my financial limitations while living off loans from my own investment company. The bridal shower was the final insult. They laughed at my gift and made it clear I would never belong in their world. But wedding day was coming, and I had prepared something special for people who mistake kindness for weakness. Saturday morning dawned with the kind of crisp September weather that wedding planners pray for. I woke up at 5 a.m. in my modest apartment, not from nerves about the ceremony, but because I had several important phone calls to make before the financial markets opened on Monday. I'd spent the previous evening reviewing the comprehensive dossier my legal team had prepared on Thornfield. Their loan payments to Pinnacle Capital were already 2 months behind schedule, something Harrison Thornfield didn't realize I knew. Their country club membership fees were being paid through a line of credit that was maxed out. Even the catering for today's wedding was being funded by emergency loans from 3 different banks. The Thornfield empire was a house of cards, held together by borrowed money and social pretense. All it would take was one strong wind to bring it all crashing down. At 6 a.m., I called my attorney, James Morrison, who'd been handling my corporate affairs since the CloudMed acquisition. "James, it's Rebecca. Are you ready to execute the Thornfield protocols we discussed?" "Are you absolutely certain about this? Once we trigger these clauses, there's no going back. The family will lose everything within 72 hours. I looked at the wedding invitation on my kitchen counter, remembering Cassandra's cruel laughter at the bridal shower. "I'm certain. Begin with the loan recall notices. I want them delivered Monday morning." "And the country club shares?" "Transfer my controlling interest to public record.
Let them see exactly who's been subsidizing their little social sanctuary. After hanging up, I made 3 more calls. One to the Board of Trustees at Riverside Community College, where I'd been anonymously funding scholarships for single mothers. One to my financial advisor about restructuring the Hayes Foundation to be more visible. And one to Daniel. "Good morning, sweetheart. Are you nervous about today?" "More excited than nervous, Mom. I can't wait for you to see Cassandra in her dress. She looks like a princess." My heart ached for him. He had no idea he was marrying into a family whose wealth was as illusory as their warmth. "I'm sure she'll be beautiful, honey. I'll see you at the church." The ceremony at St. Augustine Cathedral went smoothly enough. I sat in the 3rd row on the groom's side, watching my son marry a woman whose family had spent 8 months treating me like a burden they had to bear. During the vows, when Daniel promised to honor Cassandra for richer or poorer, I wondered if either of them understood how soon that phrase might be tested. But the real drama began when we arrived at Grandview Country Club for the reception. As my Honda Civic pulled up behind a parade of Mercedes, BMWs, and Bentleys, I noticed Harrison Thornfield in heated conversation with a man in a business suit near the entrance. Even from a distance, I could see the stress lines around Harrison's eyes. Inside the club, the reception was everything the Thornfields had promised: crystal chandeliers, ice sculptures, a full orchestra, and enough flowers to stock a small shop. The guest list read like a who's who of local society, all of them dressed to impress and ready to celebrate the union of their precious Cassandra with the nice young man from the wrong side of the tracks. I made my way to the seating chart, knowing exactly what I would find. And there it was, in Cassandra's perfect calligraphy: Rebecca Hayes, single mother, charity case, next to table 23, positioned behind the dessert station, where the staff would have easy access to clear plates, but guests would be hidden from the important people. Around me, I could hear the whispered comments and poorly concealed snickers as other guests noticed my designation. Evelyn Thornfield's friends were having a field day with it, pointing and giggling like schoolchildren who'd discovered a particularly cruel joke. "How clever of Cassandra! Honesty in seating arrangements! What a refreshing approach!" I picked up the offending place card, smiled politely to the watching crowd, and walked calmly toward the club's business center. It was time to make the most important phone call of my life. The Grandview Country Club's business center was equipped with everything a member might need for urgent corporate matters: computers, phones, fax machines, and most importantly, privacy. I settled into a leather chair and dialed James Morrison's direct line. "James, I'm looking at a place card that calls me a charity case. Execute everything. Now." "Rebecca, it's Saturday evening. The markets won't open until—" "I don't care about the markets. I want emergency loan recalls filed tonight. I want the country club board notified of my ownership position immediately. And I want Harrison Thornfield to receive documentation showing exactly who's been keeping his company afloat." There was a pause. "The emergency protocols will trigger automatic default procedures. Thornfield Industries will have 48 hours to produce $12 million in liquid assets or face immediate foreclosure." Perfect. "And James, make sure they understand that RH Ventures and the Hayes Foundation are the same entity. I want them to know exactly who they've been mocking for 8 months." Consider it done. Rebecca, are you prepared for the fallout? This will destroy them financially and socially. I looked at the place card in my hand, at those cruel words written in elegant script. They destroyed themselves, James. I'm just revealing what was already there. After ending the call, I sat in that business center for another 10 minutes, steeling myself for what was about to unfold.
By Monday morning, Harrison Thornfield would discover that his company's survival depended entirely on the woman his family had labeled a charity case. The country club, where they'd held this reception, would learn that their embarrassing relative actually owned controlling interest in their precious institution. But more than that, they would understand that real power isn't about designer clothes or inherited surnames. It's about having the strength to rebuild your life after it falls apart, and the wisdom to know when someone has finally pushed you too far. When I returned to the reception, the party was in full swing. Daniel and Cassandra were making their rounds, greeting guests and accepting congratulations. The orchestra was playing, champagne was flowing, and everyone seemed blissfully unaware that the foundation of their host family's world was about to crumble. I walked directly to table 23, where I found myself seated with Daniel's college roommate and his wife, a young couple who seemed genuinely pleased to meet me. They hadn't seen the place card designation, and their friendly conversation provided a stark contrast to the treatment I'd received from the Thornfield circle. "Mrs. Hayes, Daniel talks about you all the time. He says you're his hero for everything you sacrificed to raise him alone." Hero. The word felt strange after 8 months of being treated like a burden. He's a good boy. I'm proud of the man he's become. From across the room, I could see Evelyn Thornfield, holding court at the head table, gesticulating dramatically as she told some story to her captivated audience. Harrison was still nowhere to be seen, probably still dealing with whatever crisis had pulled him away earlier. At 9 p.m., I approached Daniel and Cassandra to say my goodbyes. "I'm going to head home, sweetheart. It's been a long day." Daniel hugged me tightly. "Thank you for being here, Mom. I know this crowd isn't exactly your scene." "Your mother was a perfect guest," Cassandra said with that practiced smile she'd perfected. "So nice that she could join us for our special day." Join them, as if I were a distant acquaintance who'd been granted a special privilege rather than the mother of the groom. "Enjoy your honeymoon," I said, kissing them both. "I have a feeling things will be very different when you get back." As I drove home through the quiet streets of Riverside Heights, my phone rang. James Morrison's name appeared on the screen. "Rebecca, I wanted to give you an update. The emergency filings have been submitted. Harrison Thornfield will receive notification first thing Monday morning that Pinnacle Capital is recalling the $12 million loan immediately. Default procedures begin automatically if payment isn't received within 48 hours. What about the country club? Board notification went out an hour ago. By tomorrow morning, every member will know that RH Ventures, which is to say, you, holds controlling interest in their club, the same club where they just spent the evening mocking you. And Thornfield Industries? Without that loan, they'll be forced into bankruptcy by Wednesday. Their assets will be liquidated to pay creditors, starting with us. Harrison will lose the company, the house, everything. I pulled into my apartment complex parking lot, looking up at my modest building. The same building the Thornfields had snickered about for 8 months. Tomorrow, they would learn that the woman in apartment 4B could have bought their entire neighborhood without blinking. James, one more thing. Make sure the Hayes Foundation's charitable contributions become public record. I want everyone to see that the charity case has been funding half the organizations in the city. Rebecca, this will be front page news by Tuesday. Are you ready for that level of attention? I looked at the place card still sitting on my passenger seat, those awful words glinting in the streetlight. I've been ready for 7 years. It's time for the Thornfield family to learn what real charity looks like. The financial bombs I'd planted were about to explode. Monday morning would bring loan recalls, bankruptcy notices, and the revelation that their charity case actually owned everything they held dear. But what happened next shocked everyone, including me. Instead of revenge, I chose something far more powerful: education. My phone started ringing at 6:47 a.m. Monday morning. James Morrison's voice was tense with excitement when I answered. Rebecca, the notifications were delivered an hour ago. Harrison Thornfield received the loan recall papers at his home, and the country club board got the ownership disclosure. We're getting calls from reporters already. How did the media find out so quickly? Thornfield Industries stock dropped 40% in pre-market trading when news broke that their primary loan was being called in. Financial journalists started digging, and your name came up as the mystery creditor behind RH Ventures. I made coffee and settled onto my small balcony, watching the sunrise paint the sky orange and pink. Somewhere across town, the Thornfield family was discovering that their perfect world had been built on quicksand. At 8:23 a.m., my phone rang again. This time, it was Harrison Thornfield himself, his voice barely controlled. "Mrs. Hayes, I think there's been some terrible mistake. We've received legal papers claiming that our loan company is being recalled immediately. Surely this is some sort of clerical error." "No mistake, Harrison. Pinnacle Capital is exercising its right to immediate repayment as outlined in Section 4.7 of your loan agreement." "But this is impossible. We have 48 hours to produce $12 million in liquid assets? That's not realistic for any company." "Perhaps you should have considered that before allowing your family to treat me like a charity case for 8 months. The silence on the other end stretched for nearly 30 seconds. When Harrison spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. "You're RH Ventures? You're the anonymous investor who's been funding half the businesses in this city?" "Among other things, yes. I'm also the anonymous donor who's been keeping your precious country club solvent for the past 3 years. Interesting how perspective changes things, isn't it?" 2 hours later, my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I could see Evelyn Thornfield standing in my hallway, looking like she'd aged a decade overnight. Gone was the perfectly coiffed society matron. In her place stood a desperate woman in wrinkled clothes and smeared makeup. "Mrs. Hayes, please, may I come in? We need to talk." I opened the door and gestured her inside. Evelyn's eyes swept across my modest living room, the same space she'd snickered about 8 months ago when Daniel first brought Cassandra home. But now she was seeing it differently, understanding that the woman who lived here had enough money to destroy her family with a single phone call. "I had no idea," she began, perching nervously on the edge of my secondhand couch. "Rebecca, if I'd had known who you really were—"
"You would have treated me differently?" I interrupted, settling into my reading chair. "That's exactly the problem, Evelyn. You didn't respect me as Daniel's mother or as a human being deserving of basic courtesy. You only care now that you know I have money." Tears began streaming down her face. Real tears, not the crocodile variety she'd probably perfected for charity board meetings. "Please, you have to understand, we're not bad people. We didn't think—" "That's correct. You didn't think. For 8 months, you treated me like an embarrassment to be hidden away. You labeled me a charity case at my own son's wedding. You laughed at my gifts and mocked my background without ever asking who I really was." "We'll lose everything," she whispered. "The company, the house, our reputation. Harrison is talking about bankruptcy. Our friends at the country club are already distancing themselves." I studied her face, seeing genuine fear for the first time since I'd known her. This wasn't the haughty society queen who'd introduced me as someone from Riverside Heights, like it was a communicable disease. This was a scared woman realizing that her world was built on borrowed time and borrowed money. "What exactly are you asking me to do, Evelyn?" "Please don't destroy my family. I know we were wrong. I know we treated you terribly. But please, for Daniel's sake, for Cassandra's sake, don't take everything away from us." I walked to my kitchen window, looking out at the parking lot where my Honda Civic sat next to a gleaming Mercedes that must have belonged to Evelyn. The contrast was stark, but not in the way she had originally assumed. "I could destroy your family completely," I said, returning to the living room. "I could foreclose on your business, revoke your country club membership, and ensure that everyone in your social circle knows exactly how you've treated me. I have that power." Evelyn nodded miserably.
I know, and you'd be justified in doing it. But I'm not interested in revenge, Evelyn. I'm interested in something much more valuable. Education. Hope flickered in her red-rimmed eyes. What do you mean? I pulled out a manila folder I'd prepared earlier that morning, a proposal I'd been working on since Saturday night. I'm offering your family a chance to learn what real character looks like, to understand that dignity isn't about designer clothes or family names, but about how you treat people when you think they can't affect your life. I handed her the folder. Inside, you'll find my conditions for restructuring the loan and maintaining your family's financial stability. Evelyn opened the folder with trembling hands, her eyes widening as she read each page. You want us to work at homeless shelters? To volunteer at food banks? To live on minimum wage for 6 months? I want you to understand how the other half lives, to develop empathy for people who work multiple jobs just to survive, to learn that a person's worth isn't measured by their bank account. This is humiliation, she protested weakly. No, Evelyn, this is education. True humiliation is being called a charity case at your son's wedding by people who've never worked a day in their lives. That evening, the entire Thornfield family gathered in my living room, the same space where this journey had begun 8 months earlier. Harrison sat stiffly on my couch, still processing the revelation that the woman he'd patronized was worth more than his entire company. Cassandra looked shell-shocked, probably realizing that her new mother-in-law could buy and sell her family's old money without blinking. Daniel was the most confused of all. Mom, I don't understand any of this. You're saying you've been secretly wealthy this entire time? Why didn't you tell me about CloudMed or RH Ventures? Because I wanted to know what kind of family you were marrying into when they thought I had no power to help or hurt them. Their true character was on full display. And unfortunately, it wasn't pretty. Cassandra finally spoke, her voice small and uncertain. You really own 43% of Grandview Country Club? Among other things, yes. I also fund the Hayes Foundation, which provides scholarships for single mothers, supports homeless shelters, and operates job training programs. Ironically, your mother sits on the board of one of the charities I've been anonymously supporting for years. Evelyn's face went white. The Riverside Community Foundation? That's one of them. Funny how you never questioned where a community foundation in a working-class neighborhood got the funding to provide services that rival organizations in wealthy areas. Harrison cleared his throat uncomfortably. What exactly are you asking me to do, Rebecca? I looked at each of them in turn. These people who'd spent 8 months making me feel small and unwelcome in my own son's life. I want you to spend the next 6 months learning what it means to work for your money instead of inheriting it. To understand that the person serving your coffee or cleaning your office might have a story that would humble you. To develop the empathy that your privileged upbringing apparently failed to provide. And if we refuse, Harrison asked, then you'll discover what bankruptcy feels like. And Daniel and Cassandra can build their marriage without the burden of your family's financial collapse hanging over them. What happened next surprised me more than anything else in this entire ordeal. Cassandra, who had been silent through most of the conversation, suddenly stood up and walked over to where I was sitting.
Mrs. Hayes? Rebecca? I need to apologize to you. Her voice was shaking, but she met my eyes directly. I've been awful to you. Not just dismissive or rude, but genuinely cruel. The charity case thing, the comments about your gifts, the way I've treated you at every family gathering. There's no excuse for it. Cassandra, Evelyn started to interrupt, but her daughter held up a hand. No, Mom, let me finish. I realize now that I've been exactly the kind of person I always claimed to despise. Someone who judges others based on what they have, instead of who they are. And the worst part is, I did it to the mother of the man I love. She knelt down beside my chair, her designer dress pooling on my discount store carpet. I don't deserve your forgiveness, and I don't expect it, but I want to earn it. If working at homeless shelters and living on minimum wage will teach me to be a better person, then that's what I'll do. Not because I'm afraid of losing money, but because I'm ashamed of who I've become. The room fell silent. Harrison and Evelyn stared at their daughter as if she'd grown a second head. Daniel looked between his wife and his mother with an expression of dawning respect. For the first time in 8 months, I saw something in Cassandra that gave me hope, genuine remorse, and a willingness to change that seemed to come from her heart rather than her fear. The 6-month program starts next Monday, I said quietly. I'll have James draw up the amended loan papers. But understand this, if any of you treat this as a game or fail to complete the full program, the original terms go back into effect immediately. The Thornfield family had agreed to my 6-month education program instead of facing financial destruction. They would work minimum wage jobs, volunteer at shelters, and learn what life looks like when you can't rely on inherited wealth. What happened during those 6 months shocked everyone, including me. Sometimes the most powerful transformations happen when people are willing to do the hardest work of all, changing themselves. Monday morning arrived with the crisp October air that signals real change is coming. I stood outside the Riverside Community Center at 6 a.m., watching as the Thornfield family approached in Harrison's Mercedes, though they'd soon be trading luxury cars for bus passes as part of their education. Cassandra emerged wearing jeans and a plain t-shirt, her designer wardrobe packed away for the next 6 months. Evelyn looked uncomfortable in her Target outfit, constantly adjusting the unfamiliar fabric. Harrison appeared stunned, as if he still couldn't believe this was his reality. "Welcome to your new life," I said, leading them inside the community center where I'd arranged their first assignments. "Cassandra, you'll be working at Sunshine Childcare, helping with low-income families' children while their parents work multiple jobs. Evelyn, you're assigned to the food bank distribution center. Harrison, you'll be doing maintenance and custodial work at the homeless shelter." "For how long each day?" Evelyn asked nervously. 8 hours, just like everyone else who works for a living. Your wages will be exactly minimum wage, $7.25 an hour. That's your budget for rent, food, transportation, and everything else. I handed each of them an envelope containing their new addresses. You'll be living in efficiency apartments in Riverside Heights, the same neighborhood you've been looking down on for 8 months. No family money, no credit cards, no safety net except what you earn. Harrison stared at the address on his envelope. "This is a studio apartment above the laundromat on 5th Street. "Yes, it is. Same area where I lived when I was building CloudMet and raising Daniel alone. You might find it educational to understand how most of America actually lives." By November, the physical and emotional toll of their new lives was beginning to show. I made surprise visits to each of their workplaces, watching from a distance as they navigated their transformed reality. At Sunshine Childcare, I observed Cassandra reading stories to a group of preschoolers whose parents worked as hotel housekeepers, restaurant servers, and retail clerks. One little girl, Maria Santos, had become particularly attached to her, calling her Miss Cassie and saving her artwork to show off each morning. "Mrs. Hayes," the center director, Linda Rodriguez, told me during my visit, "Cassandra has surprised us all. She started out clearly uncomfortable, but she's developing a real connection with these children. Yesterday, she spent her lunch money buying art supplies when she learned we were running low." That same week, I visited the food bank where Evelyn was sorting donations and helping families select groceries. Gone was the woman who'd once complained about the wine selection at charity galas. In her place was someone learning to stretch a food budget, understanding that choosing between milk and fresh vegetables was a real dilemma for many families. "Ma'am," an elderly volunteer named Dorothy Williams approached me. "That new lady, Evelyn, she's been asking a lot of questions about how our clients find housing assistance and job training. Seems genuinely interested in learning how to help, not just putting in her time." The most dramatic change was in Harrison. At the homeless shelter, he was cleaning bathrooms, mopping floors, and serving meals to people who'd lost everything through job losses, medical bankruptcies, and family crises. The man who'd once dismissed entire groups of people as lacking initiative was now hearing their stories firsthand. During my visit, I watched him carefully listening to a veteran named Robert Chen explain how PTSD had cost him his job and eventually his apartment. Harrison wasn't offering empty platitudes or quick solutions. He was genuinely absorbing the reality that homelessness
often resulted from circumstances beyond individual control.
December brought the first real crisis of their education. Cassandra called me one evening, sobbing into the phone. "Rebecca, I can't do this anymore. My apartment's heat barely works. I'm living on ramen noodles and peanut butter sandwiches. And yesterday I had to choose between bus fare and laundry money. How do people survive like this?" "The same way I did when Daniel was young," I replied gently. "The same way millions of Americans do every day. What's different now is that you're experiencing it instead of judging it from a distance." "But it's so hard. Everything is a struggle. I never realized." "That's exactly the point, Cassandra. You never realized. Now you're learning what Daniel and I lived through for years, what your childcare families face every day. The question is, what are you going to do with this knowledge?" The conversation continued for another hour. By the end, Cassandra wasn't asking to quit anymore. Instead, she was asking how she could help other people navigate the systems she was struggling to understand herself. Similar conversations happened with Harrison and Evelyn over the following weeks. Each of them hit a wall where the reality of low-wage life became overwhelming. But instead of giving up, they began asking different questions. Not, "When can this end?" but, "How can we make this better for others?" Harrison started researching affordable housing initiatives. Evelyn began studying nutrition programs for food-insecure families. Cassandra enrolled in evening classes about early childhood development, paying for them with her minimum wage earnings. By February, something remarkable had happened. The Thornfield family wasn't just surviving their new circumstances, they were thriving in ways I hadn't expected. Cassandra had become indispensable at Sunshine Childcare, developing new programs that helped working parents. She'd also started a weekend reading club, using her own time to help children whose families couldn't afford tutoring services. "She's applying for the assistant director position," Linda Rodriguez told me during my monthly check-in. "We'd love to have her stay permanently, even after her 6 months are up." Evelyn had revolutionized the food bank's client services, creating a system that helped families access not just food assistance, but also job training, healthcare resources, and educational support. Her society connections were finally being put to good use, but now she was advocating for people rather than excluding them. "I never understood," she told me during one of our weekly meetings. "When we gave money to charity, I thought we were being generous, but we were just writing checks to feel good about ourselves. We never actually knew the people we claimed to be helping." Harrison's transformation was perhaps the most dramatic. The homeless shelter had promoted him to overnight coordinator, recognizing his organizational skills and genuine compassion for the residents. He'd also started a job placement program, using his business connections to create opportunities for people transitioning out of homelessness. "I spent 40 years in business thinking that anyone could succeed if they just worked hard enough," he confessed to me during one of our weekly meetings. "I had no idea how many barriers exist for people without advantages, without networks, without safety nets. These people work harder than I ever did, just to survive." March 15th marked the end of their 6-month program. I'd planned a simple ceremony at the community center, bringing together all the families and organizations they'd worked with during their transformation. But when I arrived that morning, I found something I hadn't expected. A celebration organized by the community members themselves. The childcare families had made banners thanking Cassandra. The food bank clients had prepared speeches about Evelyn's impact. The shelter residents had pooled their resources to buy Harrison a gift, a small plaque reading, "Honorary Advocate." Daniel stood in the back of the room, tears streaming down his face as he watched his wife accept artwork from the children she'd been teaching. "Mom," he whispered to me, "I've never been more proud of her." During the ceremony, each of the Thornfields spoke about their experience, but it was Cassandra's words that stayed with me. "6 months ago, I thought charity was about giving money to people less fortunate than us.
I learned that real charity is about seeing others as equals, understanding their struggles, and using whatever privileges you have to create real change. After the ceremony, we gathered in my apartment, the same space where this journey had begun 8 months earlier. The mood was completely different now, filled with genuine warmth and mutual respect instead of tension and pretense. "So what happens now?" Harrison asked. "Do we go back to our old lives?" "That's up to you," I replied. "The loan restructuring is complete, your company is stable. You can return to Willowbrick Hills and pretend these 6 months never happened." Evelyn shook her head immediately. "We can't go back. We won't go back. What we've learned, what we've experienced, it's changed us permanently." "Then what do you propose?" Cassandra and Harrison exchanged glances before Cassandra spoke. "We want to create something permanent, a foundation that doesn't just write checks, but actually engages with the communities we're trying to help. Programs run by people who understand what it's like to struggle, not just people who've inherited wealth. We'd like to call it the Second Chances Foundation, and we want you to help us run it." 1 year later, I stood in the ballroom of the Grandview Country Club watching the Second Chances Foundation's first annual gala. But this wasn't the typical charity event filled with society peacocks showing off their designer gowns. This was a celebration of real change, with honorees including Maria Santos's mother, who'd completed her nursing degree thanks to foundation scholarships, and Robert Chen, who now ran a veterans support program.
The Thornfield family had kept their promise. They'd moved out of their mansion, choosing instead to live in a modest home in Riverside Heights, where they could stay connected to the community they now served. Cassandra continued working at Sunshine Childcare while completing her master's degree in social work. Evelyn ran the foundation's family services programs, and Harrison had sold Thornfield Industries to focus entirely on creating job opportunities for people facing barriers to employment. Daniel approached me during the gala, his arm around Cassandra, both of them glowing with a happiness that came from meaningful work rather than inherited privilege. "Mom, I owe you an apology," he said. "When you first revealed who you really were, I was angry that you'd hidden it from me. But now I understand. You wanted me to choose someone who would love the person I am, not the money I might inherit. And you wanted to see who Cassandra really was beneath the privilege," I replied, smiling at my daughter-in-law. I'm proud to say she passed the test. Cassandra hugged me tightly. "Thank you for giving me the chance to become someone worth being proud of. The person I was 8 months ago, I wouldn't want to know her either." As the evening wound down, I reflected on the journey that had brought us all here. The place card that had started everything, Rebecca Hayes' single mother charity case, now sat framed in my office not as a reminder of humiliation, but as proof that sometimes the greatest charity we can offer is the belief that people can change. The real lesson wasn't about hidden wealth or social status. It's about the fact that true worth can't be measured in dollars or social status. It's measured in how we treat others, especially when we think no one important is watching. And sometimes the most important person is always watching, because everyone deserves to be seen as important by someone. 2 more compelling stories are just a click away. If this one drew you in, wait until you see what else we found. Ready to explore?